if you say this is the greatest show I've ever played, which I've done every show, eventually some little kid's going to come to the show, and this happened to me in Australia because this little kid saw me at a festival, and I said, this is the greatest show I've ever played. And that little kid went home with his dad, and he said, Dad, that was so cool. That was the greatest show Steve Poltz ever played, and we were there for it. And then they went to see me in Melbourne. By the way, Melbourne, they pronounce over there as Melbourne, which is really weird. Melbourne. So what do they call the born identity? The bun identity? And then if you say, what year were you born? Is it, what year were you bun? Like, I don't even know how this shit works, but it's Melbourne. So they come see me in Melbourne after seeing me in the festival, and I said, this is the greatest show I ever played. And then I walked out on stage, and after my second song, I go, this is the greatest show I've ever played. And the kid was so bummed. He told his dad, he goes, I thought the show we saw was the greatest show he'd ever played. So I had to talk to the kid after the show. I was like, listen up, dude. You have to, and I taught him the power of positive thinking because that's what my dad taught me. Ever since I was a kid, my dad knew I was fucked up. So he knew he had to do this every day before I went to school. He'd put his hands on my forehead like this, and he'd look me in the eyes, and he'd go, and I'd go, and I stuttered really bad. I go, Dad, give me my superpowers. And he'd put his fingers on my temples like this, and he'd go, you can do anything. And I truly believed I could do anything. And it was because of my dad. That was like one of the coolest lessons I ever learned. So I taught that little kid how to do that. I said, you can do anything. So then he likes it. And they actually wrote me on my MySpace page recently and said how stoked they were that the little kid was doing well because they do the power of positive thinking. This is why you should never get rid of your MySpace page, because it's where everything's happening today. Hey man, I've had such a good show, and I would be remiss if I didn't do this song, because this song, it gets me. And the reason it gets me is because I was good friends with John Prine's manager, and John Prine's manager is now dead. His name was Albanetta, and John Prine is also dead. He passed away from COVID. It was so sad. And when his wife Fiona got COVID, we were worried, Sharon and myself, and we were like, oh no, because John had been sick. You know, he had battled cancer, and we had just seen him at 30A Songwriter Fest in Florida. There's this festival that my friend Russell puts on. Russell manages the Indigo Girls, and he manages Sean Mullins. Russell Carter's his name. He puts on this big festival in 30A, off of the 30A highway, which is in the panhandle of Florida. So I was down there, and I was playing, and John Prine was going to go on, and it was raining, and Sharon was asleep, and I woke her up. I said, John Prine's going to be on in about 45 minutes. We should go see him. And she goes, no, I'm sleepy. I go, come on, you never know when it's the last time you're going to see John Prine. So sure enough, we went and saw John Prine, and we were both crying at the show. It was so good. And we're sitting there watching the show, and I told her, man, did I ever tell you that Albanetta, who was his manager, called me up one time when I was in San Diego? And he had this old van, this Volkswagen van, a Euro van. And it was just a mess. It had surfboards and surf wax and CDs and bongs and all kinds of shit in it. Clothes, Mexican blankets. And so Albanetta, who was managing John Prine, called me up. He goes, Steve, it's Albanetta. Hey, listen, John Prine's in town tonight. He's playing Spreckles Theater downtown. Would you mind picking him up at his hotel? And this is before we had MapQuest and all these things, and MySpace and all that. So he didn't know that since he was staying at the U.S. Grant Hotel, it was basically right near the Disney store. And John Prine wanted to go to the Disney store at Horton Plaza. So he goes, listen, would you pick up John Prine, take him over to the Disney store at a place called Horton Plaza? Do you know where that is? And I'm like, yeah. And in my mind, I'm going, well, the U.S. Grant Hotel is very close. But sure, I'm not going to tell Albanetta that because I wanted to meet John Prine. So I go and pick up John Prine, and I figure I don't want him to see how close it is. Plus, I want to spend time with John Prine. So I pick him up at the U.S. Grand Hotel, and John Prine gets in my van, and it's just a mess. He goes to sit in the passenger seat, looks at the mess, and he goes, I love what you've done with the place. Sits down. So I get on 5, and I drive 5 South, like just go down to Chula Vista, go back, and then I get north. He doesn't know because he's John Prine. He's from Nashville, and he's just listening to me talk. I don't tell him I'm a songwriter and how much I love him, that I'm just doing this to be with him. I'm like crazy. I was going to be like Kathy Bates in Misery. I was going to chain him up to a bed and hobble him so I could have my own John Prine. But instead, I got on 5 North, and I get off, and I take him to Horton Plaza. So he goes into the Disney store so he can get some toys for his kids because he's going to be going back to Nashville. So he goes, I have to call my wife, Fiona. So he calls his wife, Fiona. He goes, I got to see if I already got him this. He goes, sometimes I forget what I've bought him. And he looks at me, he goes, and they always remember. So he finds out what to get his kids. And then he's at the checkout place getting his prices, paying whatever you do, pay money for shit. I just steal shit, but John Prine paid for it. So he's looking out, and there's the U.S. Grand Hotel. You could see it. And he looks at me. And right then it dawns on me, he goes, he cocks his head sideways. He goes, is that another U.S. Grand? And I go, and my face got really red, and I go, maybe there's 2. And I go, no, that is your hotel. And then I knew at that point the jig was up, and he knew I was full of shit. So, but he just looked at me and smiled. And his show that night was sold out, just like Joe Strummer's was. And so I drive him back to the hotel, and it takes like a minute because we're that close. And then I go to drop him off, and he goes, are you coming to the show tonight? And I go, no, it's sold out. And he goes, I'll leave you 2 tickets. And I go, really? And he goes, yeah. So I go to Spreckles Theater that night, and he left me 2 front row seats. And I watched John Prine play, and I cried. It is one of the most beautiful moments. God bless John Prine. Just because he's just such a great songwriter and such a cool person, and there's just this big void in the world without him. So I would be remiss if I didn't do a John Prine song tonight. So right now, this is a song that I'm really into that I love of his.